Sup you beautiful people, hope you've had a fantastic day. Welcome to part 1 of What If Deku Had the Powers of inFAMOUS. All he ever wanted was to be a hero. All he ever wanted was to save people. Well, be careful what you wish for Izuku Midoriya, because the universe just might grant it, in the worst possible way. Don't forget to shower some appreciation onto the incredible author responsible for this fanfiction. The link is conveniently waiting for you in the description box down below. If you guys enjoy this what if, comment down below and let me know. And go ahead and check out other what ifs in the channel after watching this video. Before we get into it though, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like, and also share this video with your friends. So let's start this video. All men are created equal. It is what we are told from the moment we have minds to understand the words. Something said to appease the masses and let them feel better about themselves, to let the powerless believe they have power, but it is a lie. You need only look around you to see that people through no fault or effort of their own are better than others. People who are smarter, stronger, richer, or even simply prettier. Those people blessed by the universe to be born in the right place at the right time and be catapulted to greatness while the rest are left behind. And it has never been easier in all of human history to see the difference between the two. Since the emergence of quirks, superhuman abilities that once only belonged in the realm of comic books had become reality. But for the 20% of humanity that had no quirk, every day was a constant reminder of their inadequacy. Most simply accepted their lot in life and moved on, better that than to rage against something you could never change. But in a society that venerates the idea of heroes and powers, it is not always so easy. This was the case for young Izuku Midoriya, whom for all his life had wanted nothing more than to become a hero, like any other young child would. He would watch videos on his computer for hours on end, seeing heroes saving people and beating up the bad guys, hoping that one day he could be just like them, but it was not meant to be. As more and more of his classmates had their quirks emerge, he remained without, and his mother grew increasingly worried and had decided to take him to the doctor. "Sorry kid, not going to happen." He had said it so bluntly it had taken Izuku several seconds to comprehend what he had heard. And he had said it with all the emotion and care you would use to describe the weather. He should have already manifested a quirk, but after viewing his x-rays, I don't think he's going to. He continued tapping his finger against an x-ray of his foot. You see, we found that those with the quirk gene only display a single joint in their pinky toe, while as you can see, he has two. By that point, Izuku's mind wasn't even there anymore, his mind hyper-focusing and drowning out the adult's words as he looked at the x-ray. All his hopes and dreams for becoming a hero snuffed out like a candle in a wind storm. He would have laughed if he could, his idea for the future destroyed by something that seemed so small and meaningless. After that, the rest of the doctor's visit and the ride home had been a blur. Once they had returned home, Izuku had gone to his room without saying so much as a word, with the only light coming from his computer that shined under his door as he watched again and again an old video of All Might's debut, saving a train full of people, and walking out of the smoke with civilians literally piled on his back. Like the Greek Titan Atlas that carried the world on his shoulders, he had become the symbol of peace in not just Japan, but the whole world, and all the while flashing his iconic smile. Eventually, Inko went inside his room to see how he was taking the news, but all she did was find her child bawling his eyes out as he turned to look at her. His eyes were puffy and bloodshot, his lips quivering and snot flowing out of his nose as he pointed a trembling finger back at the computer screen. "I can still be a hero too, right mom?" he sobbed, barely able to speak. Inko inched closer to Izuku before hugging her son tightly, apologizing again and again as if she was responsible for him being quirkless. But even as his mother's tears flowed with his own, Izuku did not give up hope. That against all odds and evidence, he swore he would become a hero even if it killed him. And as it would eventually turn out, it nearly would. Years would pass by, and while he was bullied and shunned because of his status as quirkless, he was not completely without friends. And that one friend came in the form of a short, purple-haired boy by the name of Minoru Mineta. He had transferred to his school the same year he had discovered he was quirkless, and the two had first met after Izuku defended him from Kachan and his cronies. The two had been best friends ever since. Now though, it was just another day at Aldera Junior High as the teacher went around gathering papers that all asked the same question. Who do you want to be? Now I should look at each of these individually, but who am I kidding? You all want to be heroes, their teacher exclaimed with a wide smile as he threw the papers in the air and his classmates cheered in response, their voices drowning out Izuku's half-hearted confirmation. knowing full well that drawing attention to himself would not lead to anything good. Teach, don't lump me in with the rest of these extras," came the cocky voice of Katsuki Bakugo, who had his legs propped up on his desk, leaning back in his seat without a care in the world and with a self-satisfied grin on his face. "Who are you calling extras?" the class roared in unison, staring daggers at the blonde, which only made Bakugo laugh in their faces as he hopped onto his desk, detailing how he was better than any of them could ever hope to be, how he was going to UA, the most prestigious school in all of Japan, and how he would even surpass All Might as the #1 hero. His tirade would have continued if the teacher hadn't interrupted him. "Oh, it seems Izuku is applying to UA as well." And just like that, the room that had once been so loud you could barely hear yourself think had gone dead quiet as everyone slowly turned their heads like the rusted gears of a clock to see Izuku fruitlessly hiding himself in his arms, trying to appear as small as possible, as if they wouldn't notice him. The silence was broken as the classroom erupted with laughter, louder and more damning than he had ever heard, as some struggled to breath after hearing something so stupid. "You need more than studying to get into the hero course," one classmate said between bouts of laughter. "They got rid of the quirk requirement. There just hasn't been a precedent," Izuku said, trying to defend himself before a loud boom smashed into his desk, shattering the wood and sending him end over end from his chair and onto the floor, silencing the class once more as a menacing aura filtered in. "Deku!" Kachan roared as he stomped closer to the frightened Izuku. "What makes you think a worthless, quirkless idiot like you deserves even a chance in the same ring as me? Are you trying to compete with me?" he said in a dark tone and feral snarl as he stalked closer, forcing Izuku back until his back was pressed against the wall. "Of course not, Kachan. I don't want to compete with you," Izuku said quickly, putting his hands up and shaking his head violently to try and stop the crazed boy from coming closer. "It's just that it has always been my dream to go to UA, and I know that there's never been a quirkless hero, but I won't know unless I try." Izuku desperately tried to explain as he averted his gaze from everyone else, and his voice lowered to a whisper. "What the hell do you mean, unless I try, are treating this like a joke?" he growled as several small explosions erupted from his palms, his eyes as well as those of his classmates bearing down on him like wolves before the piercing ring of the school bell brought the situation to a halt as it announced the end of the school day. Everyone took their time to leave, each giving Izuku their own version of a stare down as they left, appalled that he had the nerve to even try being a hero. Izuku did his best to ignore them as he packed away his notebook, but was stopped as an intrusive hand snatched it away from him. "And what's this supposed to be?" Bakugo sneered as he waved the book in Izuku's face before showing it to his two cronies that had walked up behind him. "Hero analysis for the future," one of them answered as he covered him mouth chuckling. "Hey, give that back," Izuku said as he tried to reach out and take it, only to see Bakugo slam the book between his palms, creating a small explosion, singeing the pages and tossing it out the window. "All top heroes have their stories begin in their middle school days. I can't have you ruining my backstory by trying to get into UA. I'm a perfectionist like that," he said with a wolfish grin as he laid his left hand on Izuku's shoulder, smoke billowing between his fingers. "So don't even think about it," he said with a look that promised violence as he moved past him. "He's so pathetic, he can't even accept reality," one of his stooges said as they began to leave, though Bakugo had one last insult to hurl at the emerald-haired boy. "But hey, if you want to be a hero so bad, I know a quick way to do it. Just take a dive off the roof, maybe you'll be born with a quirk in the next life," he mocked as Izuku turned around with a face that looked halfway between wanting to cry and yell before another series of explosions from Bakugo dared him to try something. Izuku just stood there frozen, his anger drowned out by his fear as his bullies finally left the room. It was only after they had left that his anger resurfaced as his lips shriveled into a thin line and slammed his fist into a desk hard enough that he hurt himself. "And what are you looking at, shorty?" he heard Bakugo yell from down the hall as he heard a small pair of feet getting closer. "Are you okay, Midoriya?" he heard a high-pitched voice say that brought a measure of peace to his mind as he looked up to see Mineta standing in the door frame. A bead of sweat was flowing down the side of his face as he looked back from where he came from, as if Bakugo would come back for another round. They weren't in the same class, but they had made a habit of walking home together as their houses were in the same direction. His eyes seemed apologetic as he stood there biting nervously at his lip before Izuku spoke up. "I'll live," Izuku said as he finished packing up his stuff. "Yeah, I heard what Bakugo told you to do," Mineta tried to say as he rubbed the back of his head, his hand gliding over the large purple balls that were his hair before continuing. "Don't listen to him, he's just a prick," he said as the two left the classroom. Izuku couldn't help but agree, while the two had once been friends and he would always remember those days fondly. Those days were a long time ago, and it had gotten harder and harder to excuse the things that Kacchan had put him through. "Don't worry, if he wants me dead, he can do it himself," he said flatly as they walked down the halls of their school, Izuku explaining everything that had brought him to that moment and finishing just as they exited. "That teacher's such a douchebag. He knew you were quirkless yet decided to tell everyone that you were trying to get into UA," Mineta sympathized, as Izuku fished his notebook out of the water that was currently being eaten by koi fish. "The worst part is how they laugh at me for being quirkless, yet half of them have quirks so useless they might as well be," Izuku hissed as tried to dry out his notebook, the images of his classmates' faces feeling as if they were knives scraping against his soul. "I mean, one of them could make their fingers longer, that's it. While another one could pull his eyes out of his head whoop-de-doo, and another one has a fucking door stopper for a head," he roared, letting his frustration flare before slumping his shoulders in defeat. He didn't swear often, his mother having given quite the memorable tongue lashing when she had first heard him, but he didn't know what else to do. "It's not like yours, which is cool and can actually do something," he said, praising the pint-sized boy. The two had spent many days and nights just theorizing the kind of stuff he could do with his sticky balls. It made Izuku feel better in that he was both helping his friend and contributing to him one day becoming a great hero. "Thanks man, you still planning on going to the entrance exam?" Mineta asked as he looked up at the Izuku who had a contemplative look in his eyes. "I don't know. A part of me wants to try no matter the odds, while another is telling me to pack it up before I make a fool of myself," he said in a low tone as Mineta looked for a way to cheer his friend up. "Well, if anyone could get in quirkless, it would be you. Besides, I'll need you there when Bakugo finds out I plan on attending UA as well," he said with a smile. Envy flashed through Midoriya's mind, but was quickly put out as he had known for a while that Mineta was planning to go to UA and he was not about to let resentment get between them. "I'll try my best, but only if you promise to never use that costume design you made," Izuku replied, internally cringing at the memory as the two left the school ground. "What do you mean the design is perfect?" Mineta contested, trying to defend his aesthetic choice. "You look like a baby with that thing on. No one will take you seriously," Izuku tried to explain, even though they'd had this conversation several times already. "And girls like babies, they like to hold them close and press there," Mineta said, letting his lecherous nature shine through before Midoriya cut him off. "Babies are cute. Someone dressing like a baby just so they can cop a feel is creepy as hell," Izuku pointed out matter-of-factly, looking at his friend with constrained annoyance. Even if he never became a hero, he was going to make damn sure his friend didn't end up a laughing stock or in prison. Eventually, the two lapsed into a comfortable silence, letting the sounds of the city wash over them until the pair walked beneath an underpass when the sounds of cars and people were replaced with a shifting and bubbling noise coming from behind them. Slowly turning their heads, they saw a massive villain morph in front of them. The villain was disgusting to look at, like someone's snot had been given sentience along with two bloodshot eyes and a Glasgow grin. "Oh, a medium-sized invisibility cloak. Perfect," it gurgled, as the two tried to escape only for the sludge villain to slam onto Izuku, covering him in his slime. "I'm so lucky I found you, kid. You really are my hero," he cackled with demented glee as Izuku's mouth and nose were being filled with the villain's body. Deku struggled desperately, his hands clawing at its oily body to no avail. "Gee, get off of him," Mineta screamed as he threw one of his balls only for it to sink into the villain, doing absolutely nothing. The villain, having finally noticed the only other resident of the underpass, shifted its body so that Mineta could have clear view of his struggling friend slowly begin to succumb as his flailing grew weaker and weaker. "Sorry, I only need one getaway body," he sneered as a slimy tendril smashed into the boy, sending him flying and slamming him into a wall where he landed with a dull thud. Izuku screamed as he saw his friend fall to the floor, which only served to hasten his end. "Now where were we?" the sludge villain said as he redoubled his efforts to take over Izuku's body, stuffing as much of himself as he could. Izuku was holding onto consciousness by a thread by this point, his life flashing before his eyes as his tears ran down the sides of his face and darkness was setting in. Neither of the boys were in any condition to notice the manhole cover the villain had come from fly open, its lid ringing like a gong against the asphalt. Izuku could barely heard the sound of a loud voice coming from behind him as he felt a strong gust of wind and the sudden feeling of weightlessness before finally slipping into unconsciousness. "Hey kids, wake up," Izuku heard as he felt something light, yet forceful, repeatedly smack him in the face. Slowly Izuku's eyes squinted open and was greeted to the view of the number one hero, All Might leaning over him with his trademark smile. "Oh, thank goodness you're alive," Izuku backed up quickly, his mind running a mile a minute as he stared dumbfounded at his idol. He was even more amazing in person, a mountain of muscle with golden hair and his iconic smile. He was so in shock that he didn't even register All Might's apology for allowing the villain to escape from him, holding up a pair of soda bottles that now contained his would-be murderer. Izuku only came back to reality when he saw Mineta begin to stir, finally awakening from his encounter. "Mineta, Mineta, speak to me," Izuku shouted to his friend as he held him in his arms. "Oh, Midnight. I didn't know you were like that," the purple pervert said in a daze before he was shaked awake by Izuku bringing him back to the present. "Well, it seems you're both all right. See you around," All Might said as he began preparing to jump away. Izuku didn't have time to think. He needed to ask All Might if he could be a hero, and as All Might leapt into the air, he felt a weight on one of his legs and the sound of Mineta crying out Midoriya's name. "Hey, I've heard of clingy fans, but this is ridiculous," All Might protested as he tried to get the boy to release his grip. "If I let go, I'll die," Izuku cried out, which seemed to stop the pro-hero as he realized just how high up they were. "Shit," All Might thought to himself as he began to taste blood in his mouth and looked for a place to land and settled for an apartment building. "All right, kid, you had your fun. Now I got to get going," the pro-hero said, preparing to jump away once more. "Wait, I need to," he tried to say. "No, I will not wait," All Might said, cutting him off. "I need to know if I can be a hero," Izuku cried out, desperation dripping from his voice, which seemed to stop the top hero for a moment. "I need to know if I can still be a hero, even if I'm quirkless," Izuku said again as he looked down at his feet, not noticing as steam started to leak from All Might's form. Izuku went on to explain his life dream of becoming a hero just like him, with a fearless smile, and by the time he looked up, the man in front of him was nothing like the tall, muscled form of All Might. What he saw before him had to have been the most gaunt, disheveled man Izuku had ever seen, with deep sunken-in eyes and a body that looked like it would collapse with a stiff breeze. "Who are you? What happened to All Might?" Izuku yelled as the skeleton man opened his mouth only for a river of blood to flow out, making Izuku scream. "I am All Might. You ever seen a guy at the beach constantly sucking in his gut and puffing out his chest?" "It's basically the same thing," the top hero said as he backslid down the railing, wiping the blood from his chin. "During one of my battles, I was severely injured. Half my respiratory system was destroyed, and I lost my stomach," he said, lifting up his shirt, showing a nasty gnarled scar on the side of his body. "Because of this, I can only be All Might for 3 hours a day," he continued in an almost defeated tone. "Are you talking about your fight with the toxic chainsaw?" Midoriya blurted out, letting his nerd knowledge shine through. All Might looked surprised for a moment before chuckling to himself and waving his hand dismissively. "As if that punk could do this. No, this fight was hidden from the public as the villain who did this was very powerful," he said, his soft tone turning hard and cold as he remembered his encounter. "Though I expect you to keep this a secret now that you know," he said in a stern tone as he slowly lifted himself back up, strain evident in his movement. "Wait, what about what I asked? Can I still be a hero?" the boy asked one final time. The pro-hero was silent for a moment, turning his back to the boy as he looked out over the city. "I can't say you can," he said in a serious tone, and as the words left his mouth, they felt like daggers in Izuku's heart that sank deep into his chest. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. He was supposed to say that he could do it, that anything was possible. That making the impossible possible was what being a hero was all about. If you really want to help people, try being a police officer. They get a bad rep for being handed the villains, but they are still needed, he said as he made his way towards the door to the stairway. "It's good to have dreams, but you need to be realistic." And then he was gone. The man that he had idolized all his life had told him to give up on his dreams, the only thing really keeping him going through all the years of abuse, the final nail in the coffin slamming home. He wanted to cry, to bawl his eyes out in despair, but it wouldn't change anything. They were right, they had always been right. Elsewhere in the city, a pair of eyes opened from the inside of a soda bottle, the light of the sun filtering through the plastic and leaving the world in a green tint. The pair of eyes was confused at first until it remembered its fight with the number one hero. As anger swelled in its goopy body as it swore revenge against him, but that was before a dark shadow fell over him. As the eyes looked up, he froze in fear. The blood that he didn't even have in this form freezing as a pair of cold, hard eyes stared down on him. The villain tried to roll his container to get away, but it was no use as he was easily picked up off the ground. The man stared at him, moving his container back and forth and observing him as if he were some sort of insect. "I have plans for you," the man said in a gravelly monotone voice, a wicked smile creasing his already wrinkled features as the villain screamed and disappeared in a flash altering history forever. Izuku walked the rest of the way home looking through his singed notebook, looking over all the notes about pro-heroes' quirks and how they utilized them, his face a mask of deep sadness that had lost the utility of tears. That was until he saw the last page as scrawled on it was All Might's autograph, something that just a few minutes ago he would kill to have now set his blood to boiling. "Shake my hand only to spit in my face," he growled, staring at the name so hard someone would think he was trying to set it on fire with his mind. This only stopped as he felt a soft vibration coming from his pocket and seeing it was Mineta. "Midoriya, what the hell was that?" his friend screamed, so loud that Izuku had to move his ear away. "We nearly die to a villain and then you jump on All Might's leg." "Yeah, that was not a smart idea. I just really needed to ask him a question." What did you ask him?" Mineta questioned, exacerbated confusion clear in his voice. I'll tell you later, man, I just need some time," he sighed. "Fine, just promise me you never do something like that again." "Nearly gave me a heart attack," he finally answered as they each hung up. Eventually he got home and was so deep in his thoughts he didn't even notice his mother greeting him, just taking off his shoes and going into his room. Looking all around, he saw the many pieces of All Might merchandise that surrounded him. Years of work and hundreds of dollars dedicated to this collection as they all bore down on him and judged him. That pure, honest smile that had once brought him peace and hope had turned into a venomous mocking grin. Izuku's anger finally boiled over. After years of abuse for something he had no control over and his hero rejecting his dreams, it had all become too much to bear as he leapt across the room like an animal and tore away the posters that lined his walls with a feral fury. The tearing of paper mixing with the snapping of action figures as he ripped them apart, tossing the pieces hard against the floor and walls until nothing that had symbolized his misplaced idolatry was left standing. Breathing heavily, he pressed his back against his dresser, slowly sliding down until he laid in a heap at the bottom, tears streaming down his cheeks and his hands pressing hard against his face as he lost control of his breathing, leaving him with only hiccups of breath. He had always believed that he could be a hero, that he would defy the odds. But now for the first time in his life he didn't know what to do. He didn't know how long he sat on the floor, surrounded by destroyed memorabilia when he heard his mother knocking on his door. "Izuku, honey, is everything all right?" He heard his mother ask and was thankful that his mother had always respected his privacy enough that she didn't barge in without warning. He didn't want her to see him like this. Izuku took several seconds to get his breathing under control as he struggled to answer. Yeah, Mom, I'm fine, just doing some cleaning," he said through his teeth, hopeful that his mother wouldn't open that door. "Oh, okay. But you might want to get ready, you're going to be late for your job," she said, not sounding like she believed him, but letting her son work it out on his terms. Izuku cursed internally as he looked at the time on his phone, 5:48 p.m. He had gotten a job as a bike courier to earn some extra money and not feel like he was just leeching of his mother. Sure, his father sent them money every month, but there was a reason they lived in an apartment and not a house. With a long, agonizing sigh, he peeled himself off the ground and wiped away his tears. Grabbing his courier bag from his computer chair, he opened the door to see his mother looking at him with barely concealed worry. "Thanks for reminding me, Mom, I'll get going," he said, as he put a gentle hand on her shoulder and closed the door behind him, hoping that his mother wouldn't look inside. As he was about to walk past her, though, he felt her hand grab his arm, soft yet firm in its intention. "Izuku, is everything all right?" she asked again, looking into his no doubt red and puffy eyes, and it took all the strength he had not to ball his eyes into his mother's shoulder. "If something's wrong, maybe I can," she tried to say, her boundless kindness shining through her own watering eyes as Izuku hugged her tight, so that he wouldn't have to see her cry and that she wouldn't see him either. "No, Mom, you've already done more than I could ever ask for," he said as he clenched his jaw hard, taking every last bit of his will to not let it out. They stayed that way for several moments before Izuku pulled away, knowing that if he didn't leave now, he wouldn't leave at all. "I love you," he said as he gave his mother one last kiss on the cheek before leaving, exhaling a quivering breath as he closed the door to his apartment and was greeted by the cold evening air. He stood there for only a second, letting the orange light of the sun shine on him into his eyes before walking down to the ground floor of their building was his bike. He had gotten it as a birthday present years ago, and while he had little need for it before, now it allowed him to do his job. The only kind of job for a quirkless fool like him, he thought to himself as he undid the lock and rode off into the evening. Cycling his way through the city streets, he let himself feel the wind rush by, the world melting away into a sea of neon lights and car horns as icy tears stung his face. Finally, he got to his destination. A small two-story building with red bricks that served as the courier station. He got off his bike and barely got 5 steps into the building before his boss, Hibori, stormed up to him. He was an older man with a thick mustache, a large cigar held between his teeth, and was pointing an accusatory finger at Izuku. "Midoriya, you're late," he yelled, letting everyone else inside know. "I'm sorry, sir, I was," Izuku tried to say. "I don't care about your excuses here," Hibori said as he tossed a heavy, round package roughly the size of a basketball at Midoriya, who stumbled back slightly from the impact. "Take this to the corner of 19th and Sloat. If you're late, you're fired," he ordered before storming off to his office as he stuffed the package into the courier bag. 19th and Sloat was in the historic district of the city and on the other side of the city. Why someone wanted something delivered there was beyond him. Place was filled with old buildings dating back to the first emergence of quirks, and the only place of note was the half-finished skyscraper the city had never bothered to finish. But in the end, it wasn't his position to ask. So he did as he was told, biking between cars and hearing the honks in protest as he carried on. After that it was a blur. All he remembered was arriving at his destination, and a flash of light brighter than the sun, searing pain and the screams of the dying. Midoriya's eyes flashed open, breathing in a deep gasp that set every nerve in his chest alight as a horrid pain deeper than anything he had ever experienced washed over him like a tidal wave. The pain was so great it threatened to send him right back into unconsciousness, as he shut his eyes hard, with the slightest motion sending a fresh wave of agony and making the young boy see stars. His ears were ringing, and even laying down where he was, he felt as if he was being tossed around like a leaf in a storm. But he had to get up. He knew that something bad must have happened. He could hear screaming, and as his teeth threatened to shatter from how hard he clenched his jaw, he finally peeled his eyes open once more with a deep throaty groan and was greeted to a first-class viewing of the apocalypse. "What happened?" he wheezed, a slight stream of smoke exiting his mouth as he struggled onto his hands and knees, peeling himself off the ground with each breath feeling like an elephant was stepping on his chest. His limbs feeling like jelly and each weighing a ton as he shakily pulled himself up. "Oh my God," he gasped in utter disbelief as he looked at the carnage around him. His head slowly looking in every direction to see that he was in the center of a massive, smoking crater, the smell of melting asphalt and burnt-out cars hitting him hard as he struggled not to vomit. But he was more than just at the center as he stood upon the lone piece of earth that seemed to have been spared from the worst of it, like some demonic podium allowing him to address the depths of hell that had decided to make this spot their new home. And above it all the sky was the color of blood, chalked with and smoke. As bile threatened to bubble over inside his burning throat, he suddenly felt a bright light shine down on him as he lifted his burnt, blistered arms, struggling to see the source as he heard a loud voice call out. "There's someone alive down there," the voice said, and Izuku realized that the sound must have been coming from a helicopter, the rhythmic whooshing of its blades sending gusts of embers and ash that bit at his open wounds like fire ants. "Hold on, kid, the heroes are on their way. If you can move, head to the nearest disaster relief station," the voice quickly ordered as he felt the light of the helicopter shift from him towards the destroyed parking garage. Through teary eyes, Izuku thought he make out the shadow of a person, their outline defined against a concrete wall by the bright light of the helicopter. "Hey you, in the garage, get the hell out of there, the whole thing is coming down," the man ordered as a car slid off the side and exploded in a large plume of fire and smoke. "Come on Izuku, you need to move, move," he growled to himself as every muscle screamed in protest. Leaving his podium, the fire and smoke threatened to suffocate him as his feet sunk into the pulverized earth. Like deep mud, every step was a struggle as everything fell apart. Chunks of buildings crashed to the ground, gas lines exploding, creating even more fires. Salty tears burned his open wounds as the smoke burned his eyes, and if he craned his neck he could see the skyscraper, its form turned into a smoldering pyre of concrete and metal, hanging by a thread as it loomed over him like a guillotine. It felt like he had been thrown into a war zone. Soon he managed to get close to the edge of the crater, 30 feet high, and with no idea how he was going to scale it in his condition, and he felt despair begin to nip at his spirit. Looking around desperately for an escape, he saw a small outcrop of the road that might have been able to act like a ramp out of there. Slowly, one foot in front of the other, he pulled himself up the incline, his heart sinking in his chest as he reached the summit and saw a large gap between the ground and a ruined bus hanging over the edge. It was nearly a 10-foot jump, and peering down he saw the red-hot asphalt shifting like lava, eagerly waiting for him. Gripping his still smoking jacket, he breathed hard, trying to psyche himself up as he charged towards the edge and leapt into the air, feeling the hot air rising beneath him as his legs flaring in pain at the added stress. Slamming into the roof of the bus with a cry of pain, Izuku lost his footing and nearly fell back, but managed to pull himself upright, letting himself fall forward onto the hot metal of the bus and pulling himself up quickly as the metal threatened to take his skin with it. The bus began to shake and slide, and Izuku hurriedly limped his way forward, practically throwing himself onto the roof of a car as the bus tilted upwards and fell into the molten river with a grinding screech. Izuku had caved in the roof of the car, its metal seams slicing at him as he crawled his ways over the hood and onto the ground with a thud. It took Izuku another minute to pull himself back up as he focuses his mind on the parking garage from before in the distance, with the road to it being the only way not blocked off by debris. Izuku, you there? Come on man, pick up," came the voice of Mineta, screaming into air as Midoriya looked down and noticed his phone that had been strapped to his bag had miraculously survived. Propping himself on a concrete divider, he took a trembling hand and answered it. "Minoru, what the hell's going on? I think there was an explosion," he said as he tried to catch his breath. It sounded stupid as the words left his mouth. What else could have caused all of this, but his mind struggled with the sudden change in circumstance, and right now the obvious was all that could be said. No shit, there was an explosion. 1 second everything's normal and the next everything's going to hell. Where are you? Mineta screamed in his ear as Izuku tried his best to get his bearings, looking back at the spot he had woken up. He thought the crater was big before, but now looking from the edge he could see the crater was nearly the size of a stadium. I think I got caught in the explosion," he said, not truly believing it himself. "Oh shit. You got to get out of there man, I'm coming to get you," he cried as he hung up the phone before Izuku could answer back. He didn't want his best friend to get hurt because of him. Hobbling along the destroyed road, Izuku made his way up a crumbling ramp and into the parking garage, the only place that looked semi-stable and wasn't completely on fire. Finally stepping inside, he saw sparks from a damaged electrical box bouncing across the concrete like stones skipping across a pond. He tried his best to stay clear, but just as he crossed the halfway point, electricity lashed out at him, sending electricity through Izuku's body, his muscles convulsing in spasms as electricity coursed through him for several seconds before the machine finally died. "What the hell, I should be dead," he sounded, dumbfounded. That had to have been thousands of volts of electricity, and he didn't even feel hurt. In fact, he felt good, like he had just drank a bottle of cold water during a hot summer day. As he began to walk again, the pain from before now felt duller and farther away, but his mind was brought back to the current danger as a piece of the floor above him, along with a car, came crashing down in front of him, the explosion knocking him back. Izuku grit his teeth as a fresh wave of heat and pain smacked into him as he picked himself back up, trying his best to keep from inhaling all the smoke, and it was only when he looked down did he notice the soles of his shoes had melted from the heat as he left a trail of cooling rubber in his wake. Finally, he got to the other end of the garage, but didn't notice the live wire sticking out of the ground as he once again was jolted with electricity. Izuku's body tensed at the electricity jumped from him to several cars. Their alarms blared as they violently rocked from side to side from all the energy being imparted into them before they exploded, taking out a small section of the garage and turning it into a ramp to the outside. "Whoa," Izuku exclaimed as he felt the garage rock from the explosion. "What's happening to me?" he questioned, thoroughly lost in the situation. He had been electrocuted twice in the last 5 minutes, and instead of being dead, the injuries that had been agonizing before now felt like pinpricks. But he didn't have time to think about the implications of this, as what stability the garage had before had seemed to be gone as it began to shake more and more. Trying to softly jump down to the ramp, his little hop became a leap that nearly made him hit his head on the ceiling before hitting the concrete with a dull thud as he rolled down until he hit the ground. Where had that come from? He groaned as he pulled himself back off the ground and began to hear the sound of sirens and the yells of people as he hobbled away from the wreckage. "If you are able to walk, please evacuate to the nearest disaster relief station. Remain calm, emergency personnel are en route," he heard the same voice from the helicopter say as he trudged closer to a line of police cars whose officers were trying to evacuate and bandage the survivors they had found. Among them were heroes he recognized from months ago when he saw them apprehend a giant villain. There was Death Arms and Kamui Woods leading a group of survivors out of a collapsed building, while the firefighter hero Backdraft were trying to put out the blaze. Pulling himself along, he went unnoticed, the few professionals already having their hands full. Looking down the street, he could see, among other people looking on in shock, was Mineta waving at him. "Izuku, come on, we have to go," as Izuku tried to get to him as electricity from all around him surged into his body. Street lights, cars, everything all at once struck his body as he began to convulse harder than ever. "God no!" Izuku screamed, barely able to stand as he tried to stop whatever was happening as bolts of lightning descended from the sky, hitting buildings and vehicles as people ran for cover. "Izuku, it's the villains, run!" He heard Mineta scream again through clenched teeth and scrunched eyes as more and more lightning came down. With no idea of what to do, Izuku ran in the direction he heard Mineta come from, but it seemed the lightning followed him as he ran down the street, hitting anything and everything around. But with every step, Izuku could feel himself getting weaker, his arms and legs feeling heavier until he couldn't take it anymore. As the adrenaline finally faded and he collapsed in a heap, the last thing he heard was his name being called out before darkness consumed him. The first thing Izuku felt was something soft beneath him and the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor as he stirred in his bed. Every part of his body felt like shit, his arms feeling like lead weights and his head felt like it had been put in a vice. Something warm, however, was wrapped around his arm, and as he peeled his eyes open, he saw his mother crying a waterfall of tears. Immediately after she realized he had woken up and wrapped herself around him in the tightest hug she had ever given him, fearing for a moment that she would accidentally break his neck. His mother tried to form sentences, but all the words blurred together in blubbery mess as she tried to push herself closer to him. "Mom, what are you doing here? Where am I?" he tried to question as he looked around. He was on some sort gurney and was surrounded by green curtains. More and more questions bubbled up to the surface of his mind as the sound of a door opening made him tear his eyes off his mother to see a woman in a white dress poke her head between the curtains before her eyes went. "He's awake, I'll go get the doctor," she gasped as she hurriedly left the room. He didn't have to wait long as the door opened once more and he was struck by an all-too-familiar voice. "Ah, it seems you've finally woken up," the voice announced as he watched the curtains pull away and reveal a doctor, clipboard in hand, before clearing his throat. "Dr. Ujiko?" Izuku gasped as he stared at the goggled man that Midoriya hadn't seen since he was 4. "I'm surprised you remember my name," he said in a light tone and a thankful smile. "I could never forget you," he thought to himself as he remembered that day. "But where am I?" "You're in the hospital, sweetheart," his mother said, finally able to break away from her crying long enough to answer, her eyes red and puffy from crying for what he assumed were hours. "You were in a terrible accident, my boy. You're lucky to be alive," Ujiko said in a cautious tone. It was only then did everything begin to rush back to him. The pain, the smell and noise all assaulting him at once as his eyes went wide in shock, and he began to feel a warm sensation coming from his arm. The strange, foreign noise pieced his mind like a spear, as he looked down at his left arm, which had tendrils of electricity arcing up and down his arm and between his fingers, painting the room in a soft blue glow. On instinct, Izuku tried to push his hand away as if it were some dangerous animal, and was only stopped from going further due to his mother. "Izuku, it's fine, you're okay," she said with haste, though her tone betrayed her own worry as she did her best to not touch the electrified limb. "How is this possible?" Izuku fearfully demanded as he watched the electricity flare up slightly from his emotions. "Ah yes, that. It seems that the explosion triggered some latent quirk within you," he said as the two Midoriyas looked at him in shock at the news that was as obvious as it was unimaginable. "You are not the only one as well. We have had several others come in with newly emerged quirks," he said as he sat down in a seat on the opposite side of his mother. "Strangely, it seems the majority of cases are from those that were quirkless, though there have been cases of those that already had quirks developing new ones. Yours appear to be electrical in nature and quite powerful too. You gave our staff quite the fright when you were brought in, nearly caused another blackout when we tried to run some tests," he said in a rough chuckle, the kind you'd hear your grandfather make. "Though from the tests we were able to conduct, we've seen that your body has gone through an extreme metamorphosis." He marveled, giving Inko his clipboard, showing her several diagrams and notes as he continued on. When you were brought in, any equipment that came near you had its electrical energy absorbed into you, and it seemed to have some form of healing effect on your body," he said, pointing out that anyone else who suffered the kinds of damage he had would have taken months to heal and would have left him permanently scarred over every part of his body. Izuku, hearing this, checked both his arms and even looked down his hospital gown to see his chest, looking for scars or at least stitches, but found nothing but normal undamaged skin. Also, because of this, the electrical energy coursing through your body is beyond anything a normal human body could handle, he said as he pulled out a simple multimeter, a device used to measure electricity, and asked Midoriya to grasp a prong in each of his hands, showing a reading that was 9s across the board. "To put it plainly, my boy, the energy we are seeing inside your body is in the gigawatt range. The only thing comparable would a nuclear power plant," he explained as the young boy just stared slack-jawed at the revelation. He had that much power flowing through him. "Likewise, we have seen an increase in your resting heart rate as well as cellular regeneration, well outside the standard norm, which helps to explain your rapid healing. But thankfully, we've so far seen no signs of cardiac arrest or cancerous tumors." This was all happening so fast Izuku's mind struggled to keep up. He had a quirk now, it all seemed too good to be true. He looked to his arm once more, that again crackled with energy, and the fear that had once gripped his heart was quickly being replaced with euphoric joy as he hugged his arm tight against his chest, as if it were a long-lost friend, tears beginning to run down his cheeks. "How is this possible? You said that he was quirkless, his pinky toe had 2 joints. His mother asked, completely in disbelief that her son would suddenly have a quirk after all this time. "To be perfectly honest, Mrs. Midoriya, we're not sure," Dr. Yujiko said plainly, rubbing the back of his head as if he was ashamed that an expert like him was without good answers. This was lost on Izuku as his mind was consumed in ways he could possibly use his power. Obviously, from what the doctor had said, he could absorb electricity, but was that all he could do? Could he expel it out of his body, and if so, how? How powerful would it be? If he could expel it, how much range did it have? How many could he shoot? So many questions. Izuku, you're mumbling again," his mother whispered, bringing him back to reality and turning his face a light shade of red in embarrassment. "Oh, sorry, but wait. How did I get here?" Izuku asked as the last thing he remembered had been a bunch of explosions. But before the doctor could answer, the sound of footsteps getting closer got louder, until the curtain was swung wide to reveal Mineta breathing hard before leaping up to hug Izuku, before he even had the chance to register what just happened. "Midoriya, you're alive," he cried as his little arms put a surprising amount of force in his squeeze. "Mineta, what are you doing here?" he shouted in surprise. "He's the one who got you here," his mother answered with a smile, though a sad look covered Mineta's features as she said it. "Tried to anyway, my legs couldn't get you very far," he whispered, a look of shame written across his face. "You got the hero's attention, you helped save my boy," Ink countered, not letting that kind of talk have any space to grow. "So wait, how long have I been out?" 4 days, Inko answered. "And since you're now conscious, I'll have one of my nurses bring you to the recovery room within the hour. From there, we can see about getting you discharged," he said, looking down at his watch. "I'm sorry I can't stay and answer more of your questions, but I'm sure I don't need to explain that I have many other patients to attend to. Take care," he said as he left the room and leaving the trio surprised by his sudden exit. "Hey, your eyes changed," Mineta gasped as his mother seemed to notice too. "Why, what happened?" Izuku asked, a bit of fear seeping in. His mother quickly pulled out her phone and turned on the camera app and showed him a reflection of his face as Izuku gasped as well. His eyes had gone from a vibrant green to a chilling blue. As the doctor made his way through the hospital, he gave friendly waves and words of encouragement to the staff and patients he passed. But slowly he slithered his way to the morgue, stopping only to see if anyone was watching him before he went inside. If anyone else had entered, they would have been appalled and horrified by the number of dead bodies piled in stacks against the walls to make room for more. But the doctor felt nothing, beyond light disgust as the smell of rotting flesh pricked at his nose. He walked to the back of the room and opened a door only he could open, and as it closed behind him, his facade as the kindly doctor melted away. Down the old man walked, his steps echoing across the barren corridors, until he entered a large chamber filled with huge dark-skinned beings held in liquid suspension, the lights in their tubes giving the room an ominous purple glow. And all along the walls were vials holding the proof of the doctor's years of work. Sitting in his chair, he pulled out a phone and dialed the only number on it. He didn't have to wait long for an answer as a small TV on his desk turned on, the sound of static filling the room for just a moment before the words, "sound only," could be seen. "Greetings, my master," he said in a tone tinged with apprehension as he struggled to form the words to explain what had happened. It appears our associate has lied to us," he said, bowling his head low. "And how might I have done that?" a voice said in a dark chuckle as the doctor wheeled around to see a man dressed in a white coat. "You," he practically screamed as the man stood there, hands in his pockets and a smug smile on his face. "From where I stand, the detonation went off exactly as planned. Thousands lay dead, the heroes thoroughly unsettled and society rocked to its core," he said, taking one languid step after another towards Dr. Izuku. "You promised us a new source of powerful quirks," the doctor raved as some of the lesser Nomu began taking notice of the uninvited guest, their malformed bodies crawling out like bugs from an overturned log. "I promised power, and as you have no doubt already seen, I have done so," he stated as he instantly punched the head off a Nomu that had gotten a little too close, his hand returning to his pocket as if it had never left. Garaki sneered at the man. What he said was true. These powers were unlike anything he had ever seen, deeper, broader, and more powerful in scope than almost any quirk known to him. But even still, ever since he had come, he had been nothing but a disrespectful worm to him and his master, and even now he wondered why his master hadn't killed him yet. "But I have been unable to replicate them. What good is power if it is of no use?" the doctor said as his eyes narrowed in rage, the man finally stopping only a few feet from him. Poor Garaki. "Always blaming others for your own incompetence. Your grandson would be so disappointed," he chided, like he was reprimanding some foolish child. "Though I highly doubt you care much for his opinion considering what you did to him," he laughed, peering down his nose at the smaller man. "And do not for a second believe that just because you can replicate those pathetic things you call quirks and make your toy Nomu that you can understand true power," he said, staring down at the shorter man as he glared back at him. "Because that power isn't for you, it's for his pet," he said, eyeing the TV screen. "Enough," his master said, and like a gavel in a courtroom, all went silent. "Where is the device?" the Lord of Evil asked. "Missing," the man answered back, his wrinkled face illuminated by the brightness of the screens around him. "My people are searching for it as we speak." "And what will you do when they find it?" the TV said. Far more a statement than a question, as the room fell back into silence for several seconds. "After my men recover the ray sphere, we can continue on to phase 2 of our agreement." This time it was his master that chuckled, dark and rumbling like thunder. "Take care, Kessler, you are no so out of reach as you believe. And neither is your pet project," All for One said. That seemed to finally knock the grin of his face, and Garaki was more than happy to see it gone. "I suggest you take your own advice, All for One, or your pet might meet an untimely end as well," Kessler said, and in an instant he was gone, the air subtly shifting to fill the space he left behind. "Dr. Izuku, you're required on floor 3 for a 1322, a small feminine voice said on the intercom. Izuku continued to stare at the place he had been, old brown eyes staring death into the empty space. "What are we going to do about him, master?" he asked, turning back to the TV screen. "Nothing, for now," his master said. "For now, continue with your Nomu and leave him for me," he ordered as TV shut off and left the doctor alone. Leaving his seat and allowing the mask of the good doctor to fall over him again, a low, smoldering flame of hate burning in his soul. None would betray his master and live to regret it. 20 minutes later, the nurse Dr. Izuku sent arrived at Izuku's room and wheeled his gurney to the recovery room. His mother had asked if he could leave today, but the nurse told her that it was policy to keep coma patients for overnight in case of complications, and given his extraordinary circumstances, it only increased the need. As they moved through the hospital, Izuku could finally see a small example of the carnage the blast had created. Each room they passed were overflowing with patients, with the rest forced to sleep in the hallway. The air was thick with the smell of blood and disinfectant, which made the aesthetic clash all the more jarring as they reached the recovery room. The room itself was small with a TV hanging in the corner, but what drew his eye was the room's only other occupant. It was a girl around his age with long green hair tied up in the shape of a huge bow. Like him, she was wearing a hospital gown and was looking out the window at the evening sky. "Also, visitation hours will be over soon, so it would be best to say your goodbyes," the nurse said before leaving. His mother began to sniffle again, pulling a tissue from her purse as she told him that she loved him and to take care. While Mineta, after seeing that his friend was alright, had taken to trying to talk to the strange girl. though she really only gave one-word answers before Inko ushered him out the door, but not before sneaking a knowing look towards Izuku, leaving the two alone in a silence that was becoming increasingly more awkward. "It is being called the worst disaster in living memory," the TV host said, pulling Izuku attention as he saw a helicopter view of the crater, the memories of that day fresh in his mind. Currently, the death toll has reached over 4,000, with many more reported missing. Among the casualties are several pro-heroes, among them the Buster hero Airjet and Crimson Riot. Currently, no villain or group has taken responsibility as police continue to investigate the cause of the blast. Izuku was breathing hard as he stared at the screen. The sheer level of destruction had been bad when he was there, but in the state he had been in, he couldn't truly understand the devastation. How could he have survived that? The disaster, however, has triggered an international response, as many countries and wealthy philanthropists have shown their support, and I have the honor of having one of them with me in the studio. Please welcome Mr. Joseph Bertrand. She continued as the camera panned out to show an elderly man that looked to be in his early 60s. He wore a dark blue suit with a red ascot, and his hair was shaved on the sides, leaving only thinning gray hair on top. "Why, thank you, miss, and might I say it is a pleasure to be in your fine country, though I wish it were under better circumstances." He spoke in an accent that made it clear he was from the US. "Mr. Bertrand, is it true that you have brought over 200 first responders from your home of New Marais with all expenses paid by yourself?" the hostess asked as the image of the crater was replaced with images of people cleaning up debris. "Indeed, volunteers one and all and many more are due to arrive by the end of the week." "Mr. Bertrand, not to sound ungrateful, but what is it that drives you? What made you decide to pour so much of your personal fortune into helping us rebuild?" she questioned as the camera zoomed in on Bertrand. "No, it's quite all right. I'm well aware of the reputation rich folks like me have, but I have always considered myself a man of faith before a man of means. And my faith's teachings make it clear that all men and women are children of our Lord God, and to look upon your suffering and do nothing would be an evil I in good conscience could not allow," he answered in a tone that spoke deadly conviction. "Well, on behalf of Japan, we thank you and people like you for your help," she said as the camera panned back to the hostess. In other news, it would appear the number 8 hero Wash has gone missing from his penthouse in downtown Tokyo. "We're live with," the screen suddenly turned black, bringing him back into reality, seeing the frog girl staring at him, remote in hand. Hi," he said anxiously as the woman looked back at him with large cyan-colored eyes and a deadpan expression. He had really talked to a girl before that wasn't his mother. Most girls never really wanted to talk to him, and now he found himself in uncharted territory. "I'm Izuku Midoriya," he finally managed to say, mentally kicking himself for how awkward he was. "Tsuyu Asui," she said before putting the remote back on the nightstand. "Your friend's a deviant." Midoriya, for his part, just chuckled to himself as he really couldn't argue. How Mineta made a beeline for her once he saw her wasn't good for first impressions. "He is, but he's a good guy once you get to know him." Tsuyu only hummed in response as though she didn't really believe him. "Would you believe me if I said, he saved my life?" that made the girl turn her head back to him as the slightest look of surprise marked her features and seemed as though she wanted him to continue. "You know about that explosion?" he said, though more as a statement than a question. He would be shocked if anyone hadn't heard about it. "I got caught in the blast." Izuku went on to tell Tsuyu about how he had woken up inside a massive crater, covered in burns, and how he had to crawl his way out. Finishing off, he told her about how Mineta had tried to carry him to the hospital on his back, the last part bringing a smile to his face, happy that he had a friend that would do that for him. Tsuyu seemed to look him over for a few seconds before she spoke. "How come you don't look injured?" she asked. "The doctor said it has something to do with my quirk," he said as he formed a peace symbol and focused hard on that warm feeling he had felt before. Instantly, the familiar sound of arcing electricity graced his ears as bolts danced between his fingers like the prongs of a taser. "When they brought me in, they said my body absorbed the electricity around me, and it somehow healed me," he explained. With that, she seemed very interested as she sat up fully with Izuku following suit, that feeling of anxiousness slipping away by the second. "What about you? Why are you here?" he asked as the girl, who now that he looked at her more closely kinda resembled a frog, put a finger to her lip before looking at a plastic cup filled with water at the side of her gurney. Pulling the rolling tray closer with hands that Izuku noticed were quite large, she placed the cup on one end and her open hand on the other. Closing her eyes, Izuku watched as her brow furrowed, as the water inside the cup began to shift towards the side closest to her hand. Bit by bit, the cup slid closer to her open palm before finally connecting as she closed her hand around it and opened her eyes. "That was amazing," he asked, as his mind connected the dots as to why she was showing him this. "Were you caught in the explosion too? I'm so sorry," he quickly apologized as the frog girl, not wanting to make her relive the memories so soon. However, Tsuyu shook her head. "No, but it rocked my house. It was scary," she said, her eyes glancing to the floor for a moment. "Izuku didn't have to imagine, so were you quirkless before this?" "No, my first quirk's name is Frog. It lets me have all the powers of a frog," she explained, as Izuku's quirk brain went into overdrive about how her old and new quirk could synergize really well. He only stopped when he realized he was talking out loud, though she hadn't seemed to mind, giving a slight smile at his nerdy outburst. "You must really like quirks," she stated as Izuku smiled sheepishly, his skin tinged red at the embarrassment of showing that. "Yeah, your quirks are really cool though," he said earnestly with a smile. "Thanks, yours is too," she replied as the two continued to talk to each other until the sun finally set, promising to pick up where they left off in the morning. This whole situation is a disaster. That had been the consensus amongst everyone, as within the police headquarters multiple pro-heroes had been sitting around a large round table, filled with documents and a large screen showing a live feed of Ground Zero. They had forestalled this meeting for several days due to the level of destruction, but now it was time. Detective Tsukachi stared at the screen in bewilderment as he remembered the initial hours after the explosion. It had been like nothing he had ever experienced, and he was certain that it would leave a mark on him for the rest of his days. The death toll was currently in the thousands, and it seemed like it would only continue to grow. "Things are still looking grim," Endeavor said, his usual demeanor subdued by the severity of the situation. "As of last counting, 5,000 people have been reported as dead or missing. Of those that survived, many were suffering from debilitating or mortal injuries, while the rest had been moved to hospitals all around the country." The hero Kamui Wood's eyes turned hard as the figures were laid bare. "What about the surrounding area? How much damage are we looking at?" Tsukachi looked down at the documents in front of him. The center of the blast seemed to be a small apartment complex in the southeastern side of the city. Whether the explosion was due to a quirk or not is presently unknown. The blast itself completely demolished 6 square blocks and shattered every window in the city. It also created what we've identified as a strong electromagnetic pulse that knocked out nearly half of the country's electrical grid and lasted 3 days after the blast. Hospitals and other relief centers were forced to use auxiliary power, limiting the number of people that could be saved, adding to the casualties. "Disgusting," the pro-hero Death Arms growled, his large muscular flare trembling with anger. "Do we have any leads?" Kenji Tsuragami, the chief of police, sighed. "No one has yet claimed responsibility for the attack, and the recent increase in criminal activity has made investigations more difficult. Though from what we've seen, high-level villains have made no moves, making most of the crime low-level thugs and street gangs. They've gotten bolder. Take your eyes off them for one moment, and suddenly they think they're invincible," Endeavor said with his arms crossed. "For now, we must attend to what we do know." All eyes turned to a sharply dressed man who up to this point had remained quiet during the proceedings. The man in question was Sir Nightai, and he watched to make certain he had the group's attention before he pulled 2 files from his briefcase. "There are 2 main points in this document that we need to address. Firstly, there are the objects found near the explosion," as he repeatedly tapped his finger against a picture. At first glance, it simply looked like another piece of torn metal, but on closer inspection, the shard of metal had what appeared to be softly glowing with purple veins running along its length. "Why's it glowing?" Kamui asked. "Some kind of residue. Unknown, but what we do know is that they have extreme reactions to quirks." Tsukachi's eyes darkened as Sir Nightai went on to explain how one of the people on the forensics team attempted to touch one after taking the photo. The man's quirk was called ultraviolet, and as the name suggests, allowed him to see into that part of the spectrum. When he attempted to grab the shard, its glow increased and seemed to be absorbed by him before disintegrating, whereupon his eyes began to melt, cooking his brain and killing him shortly after. Everyone was in shock at how gruesome it had been, with some physically cringing away. "Are there any others?" one of the heroes asked as Sir Nightai nodded. "Currently we have found 6, but with the size of the explosion there could be hundreds, possibly even thousands spread across the city and surrounding area." The threat to the public was obvious as they agreed that a wide sweep of the area was necessary. "Now that the first is settled, what about this second issue?" "The second is the issue of the only person who survived the explosion at Ground Zero," Nightai answered, which piqued the interest of Death Arms. How? I was there and there's no way anyone could have survived being that close, Death Arms said. Without missing a beat, the TV screened to a still frame of Ground Zero before the blast. And there, standing on the steps of an apartment building, was a young boy holding something. Who is this person? Endeavor asked as his brow furrowed. His name is Izuku Midoriya, and from what we've gathered, he's just a regular 15-year-old boy, works part-time as a bike courier and had no quirk. Had, Kamui said, questioning the choice of words. With the press of a button, the TV switched again, this time showing camera footage from a helicopter, showing one of the disaster relief stations. They watched as the helicopter circled around until a flash of light drew the camera's attention and zoomed in to see the same emerald-haired boy, covered in burn wounds and looking like he was on death's door, with arcs of electricity that flowed around his arms as the boy began to convulse. They heard the boy scream as bolts of lightning fell from the sky as people ran for cover, only seeing the boy begin to run down the street before a lightning strike hit the helicopter where the feed cut out. So much for being quirkless, the hero Backdraft said as the video ended. Did the pilot survive? Unfortunately no, and this was the only piece of the helicopter's recordings that still remained usable. But where is he now? Endeavor asked. Currently he's inside Jaku General Hospital in a coma. Officers found him further down the road unconscious, with another boy calling out for help. The other boy is Minoru Mineta, goes to the same school as him and has a quirk called Pop Off, allowing him to remove sticky balls from his head. But it seems that whatever that explosion was seemed to have awakened a latent quirk, and he is not alone. We have also gotten reports of several other people who reported to be quirkless suddenly manifest powers as well. Nai continued as the rest of the room tried to absorb what they had been told. What was he doing there? Endeavor asked as Tsukachi answered in Nightai's stead. He was delivering a package. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious.